In the small rural village of Bedburg during the mid-16th century, life was already defined by hardship. Religious and political upheaval tore through the region, while famine, plague, and conflict shaped daily existence. Fear and instability were constant, and violence was no longer an exception, but an accepted part of life. In such conditions, belief in witchcraft and the supernatural ran deep, with many turning to folk practices and darker forms of magic in an attempt to survive economic collapse and religious persecution. It was within this fractured and fearful environment that one of the most disturbing figures in European folklore would emerge. Among the villagers was Peter Stumpp, a wealthy farmer who had inherited his land and home. He was widely respected, trusted, and regarded as a model Christian. By all outward appearances, he was dependable and familiar, moving among the people without drawing suspicion. At the time of these events, Stumpp lived with a woman known as Catherine Trumpen, described in some records as a distant relative and his longtime companion. She would later become a central figure in what followed. There was nothing in his behavior that suggested anything unusual. Yet, according to later accounts, something far darker existed beneath that ordinary exterior, something concealed in plain sight. Much of what is known about the case of Peter Stumpp comes from a pamphlet published in 1589, shortly after his execution. This document, often cited as a primary source for the events in Bedburg, was written in a style typical of the period, blending reported testimony with elements intended to inform, warn, and at times, sensationalize. As a result, while it provides the most detailed account available, historians continue to question how much of its content reflects factual record, and how much may have been shaped by fear, religious influence, or narrative embellishment. By his own confession, Stumpp claimed that his descent into darkness began in childhood. At the age of 12, while alone in the woods outside Bedburg, he encountered a figure he could not fully describe. Dark, indistinct, and not entirely human. The figure offered him wealth, power, and more in exchange for his devotion. Believing it to be the devil, Stumpp accepted. He later confessed that he neither desired riches or promotion, but for the ability to, at his pleasure, work his malice on women, children, and men in the shape of some beast, whereby he might live without dread or danger of life, and unknown to be the executor of any bloody enterprise which he meant to commit. In return, he claimed to have been given a girdle which, when worn, transformed him completely into a wolf-like creature within minutes. But the girdle was not the only gift Stumpp claimed to have received. According to his confession, the devil also provided him with a companion, a succubus, a demon that assumed the form of a beautiful woman sent to fulfill his desires. Stumpp claimed she stayed with him for years. He described her as surpassing the beauty of any woman he had ever known. Whether this element of his confession reflects genuine belief, delusion, or simply the language of the time used to describe something else entirely, remains open to interpretation. What is documented is that Stumpp spoke of her without hesitation, as he spoke of everything else, without shame, without remorse, without pause. For years, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. However, reports began to emerge of unusual incidents in and around the village. Livestock were found mutilated in ways that did not resemble typical animal attacks. The remains were not simply consumed, but violently torn apart. Soon, these incidents escalated. Individuals began to disappear. A child sent into the woods who never returned. A woman who vanished before nightfall. The forest, once a familiar and necessary part of life, became a source of fear. People avoided traveling alone, secured their homes earlier, and spoke in hushed tones about something moving unseen among the trees. The situation reached a breaking point when a human body was discovered at the edge of the forest, bearing signs of extreme violence that could not be explained as the work of any known predator. Panic spread rapidly throughout Bedburg. Some attributed the events to witchcraft or curses, while others suspected something more tangible but no less terrifying. As fear escalated, suspicion began to divide the community, eroding trust among neighbors. Eventually, the men of the village organized search parties, arming themselves and entering the forest with hunting dogs in an effort to confront whatever was responsible. During one such search, the hunters came upon signs of a violent struggle deep within the forest. The ground was disturbed, branches broken, and there was fresh blood. The dogs quickly caught the scent and began tracking it. The trail suggested that whatever they were pursuing and shot at had been wounded. As they followed, the blood led not deeper into the forest but back toward the village. An unexpected and unsettling development. The trail continued through familiar paths until it ended at the home of Peter Stumpp. The men approached cautiously. The door stood slightly open, and blood was visible at the threshold leading inside. Upon entering, they found Stumpp seated in the shadows, wounded, holding his side as blood seeped between his fingers. When questioned, he did not immediately respond, but instead let out a low, unnatural sound described as a quiet, unsettling laugh. As the men remained inside, they became aware of a strong odor, one associated with decay. This led them to search the house more thoroughly, eventually discovering a cellar. Inside, they found items that did not belong to Stumpp, along with evidence suggesting that victims had been brought there and kept. The findings confirmed that whatever had been responsible for the attacks was not merely a creature in the forest, but something that had been living within the village itself. Stumpp was subsequently seized and brought before local authorities. By this point, the fear that had once circulated as rumor had become focused on a single individual. Under interrogation, he eventually confessed. He spoke of the pact he had made, the belt that allowed his transformation, and the acts he claimed to have committed over a period of 25 years. According to reports, his demeanor remained calm as he described his movements throughout the forest, how he selected his victims, and how long these events had taken place. Some contemporary accounts state that the investigation into Peter Stumpp extended beyond the killings themselves and revealed further allegations concerning his private life. It was reported that he had engaged in an incestuous relationship with his own daughter, named Belle, also known as Sybil. Some accounts further claim that this incestuous union resulted in the birth of a son, whom Stumpp allegedly referred to as his heart's ease. Despite the whispers, her behavior within the village drew quiet attention. Some accounts suggest that when she entered public spaces, she avoided interaction with others, keeping her distance and often covering herself with heavy wraps, even during warmer days. This conduct, while not openly questioned at the time, was later interpreted by some as an indication of distress or an attempt to avoid notice. It is important to note that at the time of Stumpp's death, his daughter, Belle, was only 15 years old. At one point during his confession, he made a statement that would become one of the most disturbing elements of the case. He had murdered 13 young children and 2 goodly young women, big with child, tearing the children out of their wombs in the most bloody and savage sort, and after ate their hearts panting hot and raw, which he accounted as dainty morsels and best agreeing to his appetite. Among his confessions was perhaps another one of the most disturbing acts of all. Stumpp claimed to have lured his own son into the forest. There, he transformed and killed him. According to the 1590 pamphlet, he then opened the child's skull and consumed his brain. He spoke of this without hesitation. Accounts emphasize that his statements were delivered without visible remorse or urgency. He did not attempt to deny or justify his actions, but instead recounted them with a level of familiarity that deeply unsettled those present. In that moment, the perception of Stumpp shifted entirely. What had once appeared to be an ordinary man was now understood as something far more complex and disturbing. A figure whose actions existed somewhere between criminal reality and the influence of deep-rooted beliefs in the supernatural. Following his confession, Peter Stumpp was formally charged with multiple offenses as outlined in contemporary accounts. These include incest, murder, cannibalism, and dealings with demonic forces, all of which were considered both criminal and religious transgressions under the law of the time. Based on these accounts, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. Peter Stumpp was formally condemned by the authorities. On October 31st, 1589, in the town square of Bedburg, Peter Stumpp was brought before the public to face his sentence. The authorities had determined that his execution would match the severity of his crimes. He was made naked and strapped spread-eagle to a large wooden breaking wheel. Using red-hot iron pincers, the executioner tore flesh from his body in 10 separate places, methodically, while Stumpp remained alive. His arms and legs were then broken with the blunt side of a wooden axe, a deliberate choice designed to prolong suffering. When the executioner paused and asked if he still lived, Stumpp reportedly answered, "Yes." His head was then removed with a sword. Peter Stumpp was not the only one condemned. Catherine Trumpin, his mistress and companion, was accused of complicity in his crimes. His daughter Belle, whose beauty had once drawn quiet admiration from those who knew her, was accused alongside her. Both had already been dealt with separately. Their deaths reflect the broader atmosphere of fear and suspicion that characterized the period, in which accusations of witchcraft and unnatural crimes often extended beyond a single individual. Whether these additional executions were based on evidence or driven by fear remains a matter of historical uncertainty. Catherine Trumpin and Belle Stumpp were executed before Stumpp himself. According to the 1590 pamphlet, they were flayed alive and strangled. Their bodies were then thrown onto the pyre alongside Stumpp's remains, where all three were burned to ash. The authorities offered a single justification for the severity of their punishment: to leave nothing behind. No remains, no relics, nothing that could be venerated or used. Everything was to be erased. The authorities then erected a tall pole in the town square as a final warning. At its base, the breaking wheel. Above that, a carved wooden wolf. And at the very top, Peter Stumpp's severed head. It remained there for years. A reminder of what had lived among them. Much of what is known about the case comes from contemporary pamphlets published shortly after the events, which combined reported facts with elements of sensationalism. As a result, the line between historical truth and folklore remains difficult to define. Some interpretations suggest that Stumpp may have been a victim of religious or political tensions, and his confession shaped under extreme duress. Others view the case as an early example of how fear, belief, and social instability can converge to produce narratives that blur reality and myth. Regardless of interpretation, the story of Peter Stumpp endures as one of the most infamous werewolf legends in European history. It reflects a time when the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural were not clearly separated, and when fear could transform both individuals and entire communities. In the end, the question remains unresolved. Whether Stumpp was a man shaped by circumstance, a figure constructed through fear and accusation, or something else entirely. His story continues to occupy a space between documented history and enduring legend, one that resists easy explanation. Was Peter Stumpp truly what he confessed to be? A man who made a pact with the devil and wore the skin of a wolf? Or was he something perhaps more disturbing? An ordinary man capable of extraordinary evil? That question has never been fully answered. Thank you for watching The Occult Archives.